Hello friends, welcome to the EduSat Network. Our topic of discussion today is Poststructuralism and Deconstruction. And for this discussion, we have with us in the studio Dr. Anand Prakash, retired professor of English, University of Delhi, and he has a teaching experience of more than 4 decades. Also, currently he is a chief editor of an international journal, Journal of Drama Studies. So with that, let us welcome sir. Thank you for coming, sir, and I request you to begin our today's lecture.
Thank you, Roshi, for your kind words. Today's topic, viewers, is post-structuralism and deconstruction. And they are very big words, very imposing words, pompous also to some extent. And people, who have read literary theory, particularly the aspect of post-structuralism and deconstruction, impress large number of audiences for their knowledge and sweep. But at the same time, we have to bear in mind that these big words are related to life, and they make sense to us in our surroundings, which are everyday surroundings. So I'll be simplifying for the purpose of communicating what actually is the meaning and essence of these words and these approaches. Of course, some knowledge of the 20th century critical trends and theory is needed, because if one doesn't know what is structuralism, then one cannot make sense of what is post-structuralism, and we have had discussions on structuralism earlier. The same holds true for deconstruction, which would be a kind of going beyond formalism, and if one doesn't know formalism, then one wouldn't understand what is being said here. But then formalism also has been discussed at some length in one of the lectures earlier. So I assume that viewers, most of you have listened to me through these lectures and would know that this is what structuralism is and this is what deconstruction means. So I start by saying that the basic argument of these two words is this. It is said, according to this approach that is ingrained in the two words, we live in a decentered world and cannot know where we are. Now, the word decentered is slightly putting things off track, because there is a suggestion here that the world is centered, and is the world centered? And if it is centered, then where is the center? And is the center, for instance, in the world that we live in India? Is it in Asia? Is it in Europe? Is it in America? Where is the center? And the other thing that can be said is that the world is multi-centered. For the Indians, it is India. For the Europeans, it's Europe, and so on and so forth. So this is the starting point, that things generally, structures generally have some kind of a center. But that center is not a fixed center. And in fact, if it's not a fixed center, then you can say that it has no center. And in that sense, the world is decentered. And therefore, and this is a very horrifying kind of conclusion, that we cannot know where we are. Now, this is the kind of thing that Einstein would assume in the early 20th century, when he propounded his famous theory of relativity, that the truth is relative, and that from one angle it looks like one, and from another angle it becomes totally different. So we do not know where we are situated, what our standpoint is. This is the basic argument, and if that's the argument, then whatever we say will relate to us, but may not in the same sense relate to others. I'm just starting with this thing, and please go over it in your own mind as you listen to me. And in the meantime, I introduce the other perception, which is of course functional, that inherent in post-structuralism is the critique of structuralism and formalism. Of course, if structuralism and formalism satisfied us, they served our purposes, they met our requirements, then post-structuralism would not be needed. But then something has happened when the theories of structuralism and formalism were put forward. From that time up to the time, let's say, the second half of the 20th century, certain things happened. and because of them it became necessary for people to tell that structuralism and formalism are not enough, and that something else had to be devised in order to understand the idea of theory, the idea of thought, etc. in the 20th century better. So therefore, if you accept post-structuralism as a valid argument, then it is based on the criticism of structuralism and formalism. And what is that criticism? That I take up in the next point. Still, I say the question to be considered first is, what does post mean in post-structuralism? This is a question that all of you should ask from yourselves, and I am asking for myself. Why is it that structuralism becomes post-structuralism? What is the word post meaning in this case? And then there are three things I suggest. The first is that structuralism has become outdated and is therefore to be discarded, thrown away, and then replaced by an entirely new approach. Now, is structuralism not relevant today? Is the question. Second question, that it has to be extended in scope, that is, it can't be discarded, it has not become redundant, but it has to be extended in scope to meet newer politico-economic challenges in a different phase of time. When formalism and structuralism appeared on the 20th century scene in the early part, in the 1920s and 30s, then they served a purpose. But then something happened in the meantime, and political changes happened, economic changes happened, and changes in thought of people happened, because of which they stopped making the same kind of sense that they did earlier, and a new method or a different method or a better evolved method would be then devised. The third question is that it has to be radically reinterpreted to stay as a more refined version of structuralism with newer findings in study of history, culture, society, and literature. That it's not that the scope is to be extended, but that it has to be refined, it has to be made more sophisticated, it has to evolve still further. So these are the three questions, and my answer is a very simple answer. I believe that the first is not correct, but the truth lies somewhere in the 2 and 3, and we have to actually understand post-structuralism with respect to what was said earlier in the name of structuralism and formalism. The other question, what does deconstruction signify as a term, a strategy, and an approach? Now it's a new word. Now you know that dictionaries in English in the 1950s would not have such a word as, I'm just guessing, deconstruction. There was construction, there was production, there was manufacture, but then nobody thought of deconstruction or destructuring or whatever it is, because deconstruction is a word that is that came into currency in the 1960s and 70s and later, and today it's the big word of literary theory. So what does it signify? Is it a term? Is it a word? A strategy. Now what is strategy? Strategy is the method that you use, the choice that you make in order to understand things. So you have made a choice of deconstruction now, and you will understand literature better. That's a strategy. Or is it an approach that you become a deconstructionist and then you see things different in the same literary text or in the same text? So what is it? And my answer to this would be, it's not a term. It's a strategy and an approach. That's my answer. Maybe it's open to some kind of criticism. But then I believe that if one assumes the strategy of deconstruction, then one starts understanding and interpreting literary work or any other work for that matter from a different angle and sees new things, and therefore it's a strategy of a different kind. The other meaning of strategy is that you are making conscious effort, you are making conscious planning to approach the subject, to approach the work of art or whatever is expressed. And also whether, there's the next question, post-structuralism and deconstruction are interchangeable and mean the same thing. That they are not two different terms, but they mean the same thing. I don't agree with this. Post-structuralism is one thing and deconstruction is slightly another. They are connected, and there are certain parallel points, but then essentially they are two different things. Post-structuralism is that which emerges in the literary theory in the 1960s it somehow refines structuralism and reads new meanings into the work of art. So far as deconstruction is concerned, it is totally up to the reader to decide what he or she will see or search in a work of art. And if that is not seen in the work of art that one wants to see, that one is looking for, then of course the entire venture called literary work would be demolished, and from its parts a new structure will be built. So new structures built from the old material after demolition of a work of art, it is this that is deconstruction. Let me explain further that if there is a wooden stool, then first you demolish it. First you break it into parts. You just make it a few sticks, which were earlier joined in one way, and it was a stool. Now you are destroying that. After you have destroyed it, then you are making another stool or something else. Maybe you make a chair out of it. So that is deconstruction. That you first see that there is a construction, then break it. After breaking it, you construct it again. That is what deconstruction means. And the metaphor was crude, but this can apply to literature. You can see a short story, you can read a poem, and then you say, no, what the author seems to mean, it doesn't appeal to me at all, it is something different. And you start emphasizing those points which are only indirectly suggested in the work of art. So in a way, you are then venturing into an area called deconstruction. Anyway, I have explained these two words, and now I'll go into the different manifestations of this.
Sir, could I interrupt you at this
yes.
point? I would have a certain query, sir, that we just discussed that post-structuralism and deconstruction are not similar; they are dissimilar. Yet we have come to talk about them together. Is there any reason why they are clubbed or say talked about together, or just?
That's a very good question. I was actually going to take it up, but now that you remind me, I would say that the basis of both is the same. The basis, for instance, of expecting something from a work of art is common to both, and it is there in the 1960s and 70s. People means the readers, the viewers. They want to know. You see, when I'm talking, then I'm not talking for myself, I'm talking for the viewer. So the viewer wants to understand something else maybe from the same words. Therefore, this viewer would like to reinterpret whatever I'm saying from another angle. Now that is post-structuralism. If it was structuralism, then the structures were given, and because they were given, then one had to accept them. But maybe the viewer says, no, I don't want this kind of a structure, I am against it. Then of course, he or she is welcome to change the structure. So this is post-structuralism. In deconstruction, the actual effort of post-structuralism is to make one's own structure. So both of them are aiming at an alternative strategy to the one that was existing earlier. And the alternative strategy has two parts. One is post-structuralism, where you understand as to what exactly is there in a work of art. And secondly, if that is there, then you make your own meaning out of it and you deconstruct it. So that way they are connected also. And many things are parallel, but then the two activities, one activity is to understand, the other activity is to take part in the making of a work of art yourself as a reader. So this is the point, and I'll be explaining it further. I would say that you have given this very fine insight that if there are two words and if they are not similar, then why should they be clubbed together and discussed together. So anyway, the question is still open. As we discuss further, maybe we'll know that there is a kind of alliance between these two words, and the two words cannot perhaps operate independent of each other. I'll come to this point later, and I'll straight away go to a person called Roland Barthes. Roland Barthes is a literary theorist. He's one of the first, and he immediately followed structuralists. In fact, initially he might have been a structuralist himself, but then he changed his position and he became post-structuralist. So I thought that I'll just read out the particular passage where we are given a chance to understand exactly what he means by a new method or a new approach. He says, The author is a modern figure, a product of our society insofar as emerging from the Middle Ages and English empiricism. Now just see, which means that the author was not an author in the ancient times, the author was not an author in the medieval times, he or she is a modern figure. This is the question he's raising. And he emerges from the Middle Ages. There's contribution of that. Middle Ages would be, let's say, up to 13th, 14th centuries. And then people become aware of becoming of being individuals, and the author then becomes an author. So for us in English, perhaps Chaucer is one of the first authors. And what does the word author mean? Author is the maker. In fact, in certain terminologies, the author would be God himself, because he has authored the world. So somebody becomes a creator, an author, a writer, etc. only in the modern times. In the ancient times and medieval times, they were not authors in the sense in which we understand the term. So this is a very funny, this is a very fun-giving, a very fascinating argument that Roland Barthes has extended, produced here. So emerging from the Middle Ages and English empiricism, the English view of the world around itself, the actual English view. If you have a view around of the world around you, and you explain it in realistic terms, then you are an empiricist. French rationalism, if you use your mind to understand things, in the first case you understand from your perception, empiricism. If you are a rationalist, then you understand with the help of reason. And the personal faith of the Reformation, and maybe you have a faith in certain things, you don't use rationality or empiricism, but you think that this is true. Therefore, there is a kind of a Reformation that you are redefining the religion in Reformation. It discovered the prestige of the individual, of, as it is more nobly put, the human person. This human person is a new coinage. This coinage was not there in the medieval period or earlier. It is thus logical, he says, that in literature it should be the positivism. Positivism is very close to empiricism, that the actual view of life, the epitome and culmination of capitalist ideology, which has attached the greatest importance to the person of the author. Okay. So do you agree, viewers, that the author became an author only in the modern times, from early times onwards, and it is this that is causing a problem before the literary theorists today. This is what this man is saying. The author still reigns in histories of literature. If you read a history of literature, you will find that this author lived from this time to that time. He or she wrote these books. In these books, he said all these things. He lived this kind of a life. He was in England, he was in France, and he took his influences from there. All these informations are given in the books of history, where the protagonist or the hero of literature is the author himself or herself. And the biographies are written about him, interviews are taken, magazines, as in the very consciousness of men of letters, anxious to unite their person and their work through diaries and memoirs. All these things are happening in our world today, which means that the modern world vis-a-vis literature is author-centric. Is that true? Is that right? Should we accept it? Is the question that Roland Barthes is raising. And viewers, if you think of the author today, then you start asking this question from yourself, whether author should be accepted as a person, as a human person, as one about whom so much should be written. Then Roland Barthes goes on. He says, we know now that a text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of the author God. Now, most of us in India are taught to accept whatever is written in the book. Viewers, you just think of your teachers, the traditional teachers who would say, it is there, this is the meaning, you write it in the exam, and then you will get very good marks. This is what he is saying. Is that correct? That you think of the author's message as the meaning that is there in the book, and the meaning is as important as the theological meaning, the religious meaning. And he says that's not true. What is there in the book, what the author has said, should not be taken verbatim, should not be taken as it is offered, but it should be critically accepted. If it is wrong, you should reject it. If it's right, then you should accept it. But a multi-dimensional space text is a multi-dimensional space. There are so many dimensions in which a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. He is giving a new definition of a writing. He is giving a new definition of a novel. A new novel that you are reading actually is not original. Most of the things that are there in this novel have already been said by people in their other works. So they are only retold, and when they are retold by the new book, then the old things have blended and they had clashed with each other. So this is an alternative definition of literature from the angle of Roland Barthes, who is a post-structuralist author, thinker. The text, he says, is a tissue of quotations drawn from the innumerable centers of culture. Would you accept it that all texts that are written today are actually quotations from other books written earlier, and that they are only given a different arrangement, and that is what makes them new, but in any case they derive their meaning from the cultural background or tradition of writing, and therefore nothing is original. And I'm sure Urvashi would be thinking of saying something that goes contrary to this.
Sir, he seems to be very critical of the authors itself. I felt that in the excuse me, in the beginning of the quote, he seems to be in support of the author that he calls the modern author that can then be called the author, but later on again he critiques the idea that they are producing works which are merely picked out from quotes from innumerable cultures. So why is Barthes being so critical, or is he making a pun at something?
He is not only doing that, Urvashi, he is doing much worse. What he is saying is that the author is dead. In fact, the essay from which I am quoting this is titled "The Death of the Author." So there he says that the author is not relevant. Author worked, he died, and the way the only thing that he did, so far as it is relevant to us, is that he sat at a table, and then he wrote a book. And in the course of writing, he was not doing other things. So whether he took tea in the morning, whether he met a friend the previous day, whether he did MA or BA earlier, etc., all that is irrelevant. When he sat at the table, took a pen in hand and paper and wrote for those number of hours, then he produced a book. So see it as a book. It's nothing to do with the author. He was just working, and when he was working, he was maybe drawing inspiration from different other books, and those books, when they were written, then the author of them was drawing inspiration from some other books.
Right.
So the chain continues.
Okay.
But then what is important for us today is not the author, but the book. In fact, he says somewhere, and I'll come to that also later, he says that when the author dies, the reader is born.
Okay. That's remarkable.
So in a way, the book is written for the reader to interpret, for the reader to read. And he'll go still further, and he will say that the book is to be rewritten by the reader in one's own way. So these are the words that, and so you rightly anticipated the idea of Roland Barthes, the post-structuralist thinker, who thinks that structure is not important, and that if it's there, then it has to be critically examined and then demolished. This is what he is saying in the 1967 or 8 when the essay was published, and he was going through a phase of critical awareness about structuralism that he had adopted earlier. So this is one.
Sir, again, just to interrupt, was he in general critical of an author irrespective of the age, or was it any particular age from which he started taking up this idea?
He became aware of the complexities of structuralism in the 1950s and 60s. Before that, he was a structuralist.
Okay.
And then he found that structuralism was not able to satisfy all his queries. Therefore, he went into this idea and started saying very clearly that if you read a text, then if you read a work, then read it as a text. And the difference between the work and the text is that the work is produced by the author, and the text constitutes words. And therefore, do not go to the author, do not go to the background of the author, do not go to the background in which the book is produced and all those things. You just look at the words in their combination, in their patterns, etc., and draw your meaning out of them, not some other meaning, because this meaning that you will draw, that will relate to you. So in a way, with the help of these words, you as a reader, I as a reader, it is we who are actually creating meaning with the help of this available cluster of words.
Right.
So, book is a cluster of words, it is a combination of words, and you can always make your own permutations and combinations of the words. You can in fact start a book from the ending, and you can read backwards, and you can read the third chapter first and the first chapter later, and the book will mean the same thing to you. Of course, at one level this sounds very humorous, but another level, well, in our culture we keep doing this all the time. For instance, when I went to watch Ram Leela many years ago as a young man, then somebody said that today that scene is not ready, and we will do the same scene that we did last year, and please bear with us. So we saw the same scene. So where did Ramayana begin? So far as this Ram Leela was concerned, it began in the middle. So that way, in literature, in life, etc., all these experiments are done, and that is, I think, they are deriving their inspiration, or drawing their inspiration from such examples as this, where literature doesn't have a beginning or an ending. So why should a work have a beginning and an ending? Then there is another great thinker of the 20th century, a great theorist, greater than perhaps Roland Barthes. This person's name is Derrida, and I want to pay a kind of compliment to him for extending the scope of structuralism and deconstruction to the extent that he totally frees, he totally gives a kind of freedom, liberates the reader from the likely onslaught of the author, and he would go hammer and tongs. He would be absolutely critical of the idea of the author being there at all, because it's not possible. So far as Derrida is concerned, he offers a theory according to which it's not possible to be an author, or things like an author doesn't exist. And when he says this, then of course we start wondering whether a literary theory is the same thing that we've been hearing about it, or it is something different. So I'll be taking a slightly longish quote to explain this idea, and this idea is quite available to us. It's quite easy to understand, and let's see what he says about this. Derrida's view of the center. Now, what is the center? Who is the center of life? Who is the center of a work of art? Who is the center of a certain structure? You see, when we have a certain structure on the page or on the wall, then there are certain boundaries, and those boundaries are unreal boundaries. Of course, all of us know. Somebody drew the boundaries there, and then how do you read that? How do you understand that particular painting or that particular book, or the words on the page, and which is the center of the book or of the work of art? So he's talking about the idea of the center, the central meaning, the central idea. Is there a central idea? Let's see whether Derrida is able to sort this point out to us. He says, henceforth, I've taken this from his chapter, from his essay on structure and science, something like that, structure and the world of science. And there, in the middle, I picked up this quotation from there. Henceforth, he says, it was necessary to begin thinking that there was no center, that the center could not be thought in the form of a present being, that somebody is there and somebody is present, and that this person is the center. It can be the author. It can be a meaning which you think is the central meaning of a work. Now, if you say that there is a central meaning of a work, then where from did that meaning come? So all these things, these are theoretical problems, and they have to be gone into. So he says that there was no center, that the center could not be thought in the form of a present being, that the center had no natural site, that naturally it was there, that naturally something happened of its own, with the logic that we don't understand, but then it naturally happened. Center is not natural. That it was not a fixed locus, a fixed point, that is, but a function. So in literature, in the literary work, in an episode, in an event, in a philosophical essay, what we find is not a center but a function, that something is being done. So that thing which is being done, that is important, not why it is being done, because the moment you raise the question of why, then you are making the question of meaning, you are making the question of certain argument. So it was being done, it was a function, and then he says it is a sort of known locus. a place, where one doesn't exist. There is no place of a center in which an infinite number of sign substitutions came into play. You will realize that when you read a work of art, a work of literature, when I read a work of literature, then there would be, how many words in a book which has, about 200 pages? Well, I think it will be about 80,000 words. Now, these 80,000 words or 100,000 words, these words, how are they related? First, with one another in the book. Second, with others in other books, and so on and so forth. And you will find that sign substitutions will occur all the time as you are reading a work of art. So, where is the center? The center either comes from these things or it comes from nowhere, and there is no center in fact. So, this is the first point he is making, that in a work of art, in a work of literature, in a text, there is no center. And if you think of a center, then one is deceiving oneself. This was the moment.
Sir, can I interrupt you
Yes,
once
yes,
more?
please.
Sir, you said there is no center which is equal to central idea. Now, when we generally talk of a text, we say, this so and so novel, this central idea is this. So, with that, the reader is saying that we need to identify what is the function of that idea. That is more important. Sir, please correct me if I am wrong.
No, this is correct, but there are implications of the function. Who decides what the function is? Of course, for instance, what is the structure that one is talking of? Secondly, what is at the center of the structure? So far as the reader is concerned, he will say there is no center of the structure. When you read a structure, then you yourself find some center somewhere. When I read it, I find some other center. So which means that the centers are shifting. And if people are giving, a sense of center to a particular work, then it has no natural center.
Right.
This is what Roland Barthes also was saying. So in that sense, if you have a center which is natural to it, then you are referring to something which, according to which this is a center. There is a word called referent. When you talk of height, that this is 6 feet, then that is a standard of 1 foot, and you can measure it. So that's the referent. Is there a referent somewhere outside the text of the center that you call a center? So this is the question. For instance, how is a thing true? How is a thing acceptable? You find certain things acceptable in a book. So how do you find out that this thing is acceptable? There must be a center working in your mind which tells you this is right.
Definitely.
But it may not be working in my mind. So which means the referent is changing in all the cases. If it is changing, then it's our own referent.
Yes.
It's nothing like a natural referent. If you think of a natural referent, then you will believe in God. But then if you read a work of art, you will realize that God is a creation, and God himself or herself is a creation of somebody, which means God is not God. So, and actually the word God he is using somewhere, God and author, but then here he is using the word, I will come to this, transcendental signified. So there is nothing like transcendental signified. The signified is there within the text. It's not outside the text.
The reader makes sense of it according to their own reference point.
Reference points which are based on the interpretation of the text and the words.
Right.
So that's what it is. If you are finding reference outside the text in a transcendental signified, that it's a kind of godly thing, godly word, etc., it doesn't make sense. It makes sense to you, it may not make sense to me. A third person will find both of us wrong, and so on and so forth.
Sir, you use the phrase sign substitution. So can you describe?
One sign substituted by another sign. One word substituted by another word. And all words can be used. I use glass of water, you use the word liquid, a third person uses something else. And these substitutions are happening in the case of each and every sign.
Right.
So this sign substitution helps us understand things better in a work of art. So that's how these literary theorists, and particularly deconstructionists and poststructuralists, this is how they approach literature. So in a way they are setting us free from the shackles of a work of art, which is supposed to be, as you rightly said initially, the central idea. There is nothing like a central idea.
Yes.
The central idea belongs to the reader, and the reader, after a year or so, the reader may have known more, and when you ask him the same question about the same book, he might find a central idea elsewhere.
Right.
So in the meantime, that center has shifted. So in this sense, post-structuralism and deconstruction, they always talk of a decentered world, whether it is the world of literature or the world of the real. So, now that it has been explained to a certain extent, I will just read through this. Provided we can agree on this word, that is to say, a system in which the center signified, the original or transcendental signified, original, nothing like original, is never absolutely present outside the system of differences, in different words, to be simpler. The absence of the transcendental signified extends the domain and the play of signification infinitely. That, if you go further into the text, then signification or meaning keeps changing more and more. And this is where, one is totally free to make sense of a work of art according to one's priorities or according to the sense of acceptability built into the structure of one's mind. Then the point he is making, it is the same extension. Where and how does this decentering, this thinking the structurality of structure occur? What is the structure? Well, you can say this, that somebody worked at the structure, but he's not talking about that, because structure is not made by anybody. Structure is maybe picked up, maybe it is adopted, maybe it is tinkered with, but then the structure is a structure, and it becomes a structure not because somebody worked at it, but because it has a kind of structurality. When you face a structure, then you know that it begins here, it ends there, etc., and that it has solid walls. And if you change the pattern of the walls, it becomes a different structure. So it's not the same structure. Therefore, every structure has a structurality. Is there a center in the structure? No. So and structurality, actually, if you go back to it, structurality is the function of the structure. So maybe one is not making much sense out of it, because you are using the same words again and again, structure and structural, and from there post-structuralism and all, the words are similar, but then through them you realize that a structure has to be understood in its structurality, not in its making, not in its origins, that it originated from the author, it originated from God, etc., but that it is there in front of us. A doctrine or an author, in order to designate this occurrence, it will be somewhat naive to refer to an event, a doctrine or an author, in order to designate the occurrence. Why talk about occurrence? Who wrote it? When was it written? You just say that the book is there in front of you. The book is there in a manner of pattern of words. You have a pattern of word in your own mind, and therefore you judge, you find difference, you find agreement, etc., and then you make sense out of it. That's how post-structuralism has to view writing. Then Derrida's elaboration, now this is my sentence, of the idea is meaningful in the context of a literary text, where there is no natural center, where the supposed center has no fixed locus but a function, and decentering occurs by virtue of the structurality of the structure alone. So this is how I conclude Derrida's argument, and this argument is there of deconstruction and also post-structuralism. So from here I go back to the earlier questions. I have a few minutes left, and in them I'll just explain, because most of it has been now made at least clear to myself. Derrida, I'm talking to Derrida and Roland Barthes and others, I'm assuming, just for the sake of simplifying these things. So I'll go into a few other areas now. For instance, I'll go into the area of Derrida rejecting the principle of centers, unity. What is unity in a work of art? Well, unity is that there is something that is following the principle of plot line. Plot line offers the unity. Aristotle, talks of the plot, and at one place says that a drama can exist without characters, but cannot exist without a plot. So what Aristotle meant by saying this was that drama is a kind of a narrative where there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end, which means that it's a unified work. This is what Aristotle said, and Derrida is going totally against this, and he says that the principle of unity in a work of art is to be rejected. Why? Because this unity is supposed to be imposed by a certain thinking being who was limited in one's own self, and therefore distorted the reality by imposing a structure on it. So we are supposed to then identify the structure that is imposed and then go into the fallacious aspects of the structure and see whether this can be recognized and properly proved. He also argued against distinction between literature and other areas of signification. Argued against means that he thought them together. Now this is once again very contentious. When you are reading a novel, are you rejecting a reading which is of a political problem, about a political problem? Is a political essay and a novel the same thing? What is your answer, viewers? And what would be the answer of Urvashi in this case? Are they two different things?
Sir, when we talk about literature that or even an essay, I would say that it becomes an interdisciplinary idea, because whenever we discuss a work of art or literature, it's not just literature, it is also incorporating into itself maybe history, politics, economics. So one is not divorced from the other in that sense.
Then why these two words, art and thought, art and economics, art and novel, art and criticism? There are words and they mean different things.
Definitely, sir. Then there's one might say, okay, no, this is specifically history, but this is literature. But I would say that literature, even if not said that it has history, will definitely be interdisciplinary. It just cannot be literature or just a story. It has to evolve or take from the circumstances in which it was written.
Suppose one is not able to walk out of literature into history. One remains confined to literature. One is reading a book, and in the other case one is reading, let's say, a book of economics. So will that book economics be literary, or will a book of literature be economics or politics? This is the question. Do they belong to the same area?
Sir, no.
This is where the point of contention lies, because Derrida says there is no distinction. He argues against distinction between literature and other areas of signification. For him, all of them are the same thing: politics, economics, sociology, philosophy, and literature. And why does he say this? Any guess? Why is he calling that there can't be made a distinction between art and philosophy, art and criticism, etc., economics? Why is he saying this?
So, because I would still like to emphasize that there's intermingling of all the disciplines when one writes. So, even when one writes of a childhood story, they would still say, when I was young this happened. So, that brings in a period of the past, the history, and so, sir, I would request you to throw more light on this.
No, I'll go to the, you're right, broadly speaking. Derrida maybe would answer it like this. He would say that since a book of economics also constitutes words which are there in the dictionary, which relate to life in general, and a literary book also is words. So aesthetics, it doesn't matter. What matters is the world of words in their interconnection. And these words in their interconnection mean the same thing in the book of economics as they do in the work of literature. And since meaning is related to the individual's idea of a unified world, and that idea may be wrong or right, in that case the individual is supposed to get the same kind of pleasure from all these books, because when he or she understands a book of politics, then the same kind of pleasure can be derived as one does when one is reading a novel or a play. So far as he is concerned, reading is signification, and in this case, when you read politics, then you understand through signification you understand the political world. When you read economics, then you understand the same word, sociology the same word. So the world that is there behind them, being unified in itself, or is capable of communicating a unified meaning to the reader according to the reader's choices, etc. Therefore, the world cannot be divided into. And the same way, the world of writing or reading cannot be divided into different areas, because they are basically talking about the same world in which we live. you can extend the argument further and say that in today's world, the second decade of the 21st century, the world is unified. Whether any economic problem arises at one place, it affects the rest of the world, and vice versa. So the same thing happens if there is an economic crisis somewhere, then the world of writing will be affected. Writers will be affected by that. And if a writer is facing question of liberty in a particular case, if a writer's book is being proscribed or banned, etc., then that also is a reflection on the world in which the writer lives. So at the level of thinking and living in a particular world where ideas have to be brought in, one cannot really divide these areas as watertight compartments. So then he would say that one should not accept the distinction between literature and other areas of signification, as I say. Is it somewhat clear?
Sir, it is clear, and I would also with this like to ask you and also clarify my understanding is that he says both contain words, and hence if one understands those words, then there is no distinction between say literature or economics, but it also then depends upon the interest, but that's probably an entirely different thing. So then he says it is all about words. So
all about signifiers.
Signifiers.
Yes, and they are signifying different aspects of reality around. So that reality can't be separated from economics and other things.
So that's a very interesting idea, although I think it's taking a little bit of time to settle it.
No, his examples are really very amusing sometimes. He says, bread is not bread, bread is a word. In fact, when people argued with him, in the interviews and all, he said poverty is a word. Poverty is not actual. It is the word which is important in this case, because he's looking at the whole thing as being expressed through words which then become a text for him. And in that text, and of course he is a philosopher of freedom. He is asking us not to be bound down by those words. He is asking people to interpret those words in the light of what they want. And when they want that, then in some area certain emotions are lighted up, and of course then one behaves differently. But the moment one starts thinking about those areas, then one starts giving them words.
Right.
So that way they become a text. So the human being also is a text. So far as
yes.
he is
one can make human beings a study. So in that way the human being becomes a text. And it's very interestingly put by him that don't make a distinction between literature and other disciplines.
In fact, the examples about Derrida, sometimes he takes up some tract from Rousseau, and he writes a whole essay on it. So he can do that. He can sometimes take a sentence and write 50 pages or 60 pages, saying that this word could mean this, and there is another associated word which throws a different kind of a light on this. So he keeps elaborating, and through elaboration he makes us aware of the complexity of the world in which we live.
Right.
So and that's the purpose of literature also.
Yes.
So in a way, Derrida is a philosopher of liberating the reader from the clutches of the writer,
Right.
from the clutches of the author, from the clutches of the person who has produced the book. And he says, read the book the way you want it. Derive the meaning out of the book, the meaning that is after your heart.
Right.
So the second point, and I think I'll finish with this, that Derrida's understanding in particular, and post-structuralism in general, brings different approaches of the modern world very close to one another. For instance, can one wish away Marxism today, which was thought of and evolved in the 19th century by Karl Marx, Engels, later on practiced by Lenin, and all those people in the 20th century, and which brought about a change in the world for the benefit of a large number of masses. That's what Marxism is. And what is Derrida's take on Marxism, for instance? And how does post-structuralism make sense of Marxism in that sense? And Marxists have taken to this kind of post-structuralist strategy very, very kindly. Some people use these things, that the world is one, the world is undivided, and in the world justice and injustice, they have to be counterposed. These contradictions have to be understood, and they have to be understood not from the point of view of somebody else making the society, but human beings themselves making and breaking the society at the same time. So a kind of deconstruction and Marxism have come together. In fact, Terry Eagleton, the Marxist critic, takes a great deal of help from the method of deconstruction to understand literary works in one's own way. I'm reminded of the example of Edward Said, of a novel written by Jane Austen, where it is Mansfield Park, the novel, and in that novel, there is a reference to a character who doesn't live in the main plot of the novel. He remains away from home, and he comes back. He's the lord, and he comes back, and his children are enjoying themselves at home on his estate. But he generally goes outside, and when he comes back, then of course he finds that the world that is changing, and the children now don't obey him as much as they should have obeyed him, and then he goes again. So Edward Said said, where is he going? And then of course he pointed out that he is going to Antigua, and if he is going to Antigua, what is he doing there? Perhaps he is indulging in the slave trade and production. So he is getting the money, but by the time he comes back with all that money, the family has changed. So this meaning is not there in the novel. Jane Austen never thought of introducing this area, but then it's inbuilt in the novel. So when this kind of a method is used, then Mansfield Park by Jane Austen starts affording a different kind of a meaning than the one that the writer herself thought of presenting in her book. The same thing is true about feminism, because Marxism, deconstruction, and feminism, these have come very close to each other in the modern period, particularly under the impact of post-structuralism and deconstruction. Because when one is a feminist, one starts deconstructing the codes of behavior which are prescribed for women. And how can you prove that actually patriarchy is working behind not just social relations, economic relations, but also also behind all the ideology that is rampant in our midst. And feminists then would say, okay, let's understand the language. Why is it that all the time you say his, and why not say his and her? These are structured inside, and the different strategies of feminism to understand. These strategies have come into existence under the impact of deconstruction. So a feminist, for instance, found a different kind of message from D.S. Lawrence's works. So the deconstruction method was used to find out that D.S. Lawrence was greatly against women, and he was making jokes at the cost of women. In Sons and Lovers, he is not giving the kind of understanding to one character. Is it Laura? As he is giving to another, and the prejudice can be seen quite well in his language. So when you go into the language that is being used, and the situations that are being created, or to use Derrida's word, structured into the plot, then you realize that if you are aware about the feminist ideas, then you would derive a different meaning from even a great work of literature like Lawrence's. So these are the questions that have actually joined all these different philosophies, all of which are rational, all of which talk also about history, directly or indirectly. And it is this that has contributed to the evolution of an approach which is basically freedom or liberation centered in the world. So is there anything, or should I conclude?
Sir, of course, as you said, there's an interaction between these theories. You said Marxism and deconstruction and feminism. So one can be used to interpret the other. Say you gave the example of D.H. Lawrence, and then in that particular novel, Sons and Lovers, we could use feminism to deconstruct, or deconstruction to read feminism.
Yes, very good.
So we can say either one?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So I did have a slight question. You said Derrida rejected identity and signification. How did identity, is it the identity of the author, we can say?
Identity also of the if you give an identity to a community, if you give a kind of national identity, somebody is a German, somebody is a Frenchman, etc., somebody is a tribal, etc. These are identities of people. So these identities are human made, and they emerge in history. So these identities have no relation to the nature of the person.
Right.
So therefore, he is liberating from there also.
Yes.
So no identity,
Yes.
no signification of the fixed kind. Signification is your creation, your production.
Right.
Yes.
So then if there are no identities, say somebody is white and somebody is black, and so could we then include the gender angle into a deconstruction reading?
You can, definitely. And the gender part is equally important as the other part. So different identities should be allowed to work together, and there should be writers, there should be thinkers who would say that these are human made identities, which means they are open to change. The problem with most of the identities is that they are supposed to be fate like, that you can't change them. They are fixed, and you have to follow them as patterns of principle, which is wrong. One should try to see them as to what they are, and should be their master, not their slave.
Absolutely.
So this is his message.
Absolutely, sir. Sir, I would request you to conclude, and if we then have more time, I would ask you more things.
Okay, you see, Derrida is at the moment, that is in the second half of the, now he is dead, in the second half of the 20th century, Derrida is giving a philosophy which is libertarian, which is progressive, rational, and freedom seeking. At the same time, he is raising these questions at a time when the world is locked in a life and death struggle, around property, around politics, etc. And these ideas at that point of time appear to me at least anarchic. They do not bother about structures at all. But certain structures at a particular time may be needed by humanity. And this is where he becomes a kind of abstract philosopher. For instance, in the third world countries, certain human beings, and their number is very large, women particularly, children also, these people can be protected under the structure of family. Now it's a practical question, not a theoretical question. It can also be raised to the level of theory. Somebody can say that family is a human made thing and all those things. But then isn't at this point of time, family structure will help and will help find security for women and children till a time when this structure is not important, it can be thrown away. India is a poor country, and a poor country requires certain boundaries and certain kind of structure so that it can save itself from the onslaught of what Derrida himself would call imperialism. So would he allow imperialism to be just named as a word that can be rejected or accepted, or would he think of strategies to counter imperialism from the side of people who are victims of it? So in a way, there is a kind of politics that Derrida's argument is promoting, and that is a kind of anarchism, that do not get together, talk not about identities. You talk about individuals, and the individuals should find something wrong or right, and if you unite into certain groups in order to fight a common kind of a problem, then Derrida would be found wanting in this. So maybe he is saying the right thing at the wrong time. Maybe in the 20th century, when there are many problems which seek precedence over others, when those problems are pushed under the carpet, and when a theoretical principle of all identities being together, etc., is presented, then one says that one is talking more about the future, when humankind will have done away with all the restrictive structures and would have gained freedom. So I would say that Derrida is an important philosopher to tell us that the world is human made and not God made. It doesn't have an author, and that the book also is written not by an individual but by certain forces which work through the individual. And once the books are written, then the author is freed from the responsibility of owning or defending the book.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing, and there are still more questions before me, and I think that this discussion has to continue.
Of course, sir, we could continue our discussion in our next lectures and probably take up from there. But today, because of shortage of time, we will have to stop here, and let us thank sir for talking about post-structuralism and deconstruction. And we will continue our series on literary theory in our next lecture tomorrow. So thank you so much, sir, and thank you viewers. Have a wonderful day.